This is the Chester County Real Estate Podcast, bringing you the info you need to make your next move a great one. This show is brought to you by RE/MAX Ace Realty. For show notes and links, go to acerealtypa.com/podcast.
Hey everyone, welcome to the Chester County Real Estate Podcast. I'm your host, Sean Dominski, and this is the show that gives you the information you need to make sure your next move is a great one. And today I'm sitting here with Jim Whelan from RE/MAX Ace Realty. Jim, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Hi everyone. Well, I've been a realtor for about 22 years.
Wow.
In Chester County, Delaware County, Montgomery County area, Berks County, of course. I have done everything from residential homes to shopping centers, restaurants. I spent many years working with what's called an REO, which is a real estate owned property, or commonly a foreclosed or a bank owned property.
Yeah, and that's what I wanted to talk about today a little bit, because it's kind of an area that a lot of agents have knowledge in, but not always experience.
It can be a very rewarding experience, but it also can be a very detrimental one.
Gotcha.
In the expense. Okay, you really, as a first home, you really shouldn't look at a foreclosure.
Well, let's start with what is an REO, and let's just kind of talk about the difference between a foreclosure, bank owned, REO.
Okay, REO is called real estate owned. Okay, it could be owned by the Veterans Administration, HUD, which is Housing and Urban Development. It could be owned by Wells Fargo, Bank of America. It could be owned by Fannie Mae.
So I would understand why Wells Fargo would own a property. So someone had a mortgage with Wells Fargo. They stopped paying it. There was a foreclosure, a sheriff's sale, and now Wells Fargo is the owner of the property. Why would the Veterans Administration own a property?
Well, Veterans Administration, HUD, Housing and Urban Development, or Fannie Mae actually purchases mortgages from banks. See, the federal government buys mortgages from banks, so the banks can actually do more mortgages. That's what keeps the money moving.
So, and the federal government does that through the Veterans Administration, through Fannie and Freddie, which are government programs?
They're actually what they're called quasi-government programs.
Okay.
They were created by the government more or less as holding companies for mortgages.
And Fannie and Freddie buy the mortgages off of the banks, off of the mortgage
Correct.
companies.
They typically buy conventional mortgages. They will buy some commercial, some investment mortgages.
Now, what about HUD? Housing
and Urban Development.
Sorry, yeah, I'm like, does that make sense? These acronyms kind of throw me off sometimes. So HUD is
can be very confusing.
Housing and Urban Development.
Correct.
What is their role in the real estate
They are
market?
actually what would be called FHA.
Okay, that makes sense, because we've all heard about FHA loans, and FHA stands for Federal Housing Authority, right? Which definitionally sounds very similar to Housing and Urban Development, but
Correct.
HUD is the organization that issues the FHA loans.
They hold the funds.
Gotcha.
Okay. There's also another group called USDA,
Now,
which do more of the farm type properties, and that's also ran through HUD.
Okay. But USDA...
And the Department of Agriculture, too, by the way.
So the USDA, that's the RD loans, the Rural Development Loans.
Correct.
Is run through the U.S. Is this the same organization that stamps whether or not the meat is good to eat?
Yes, just another division, yes.
Okay.
Or your jalapeno peppers.
Or my jalapeno peppers, which I'm a big fan of. Yeah, and so a REO would be an umbrella term that covers bank-owned properties and these government-owned properties.
It is. And when you're into business, most agents, realtors, will just say an REO. It's a quicker, easier, more or less slang word to say.
So right there, say someone is interested in a house that's an REO. It's going to be listed in the MLS as real estate owned by whoever. So your agent's going to know whether it's an REO or not.
That is correct.
You might not know if you see an ad or see something on Zillow or on a website or so. It's just going to look like a regular listing for the most part until you dig down into it. But if you're working with an agent, that agent will be able to tell you.
A good realtor will be able to instruct you and navigate you not only through seeing the property, but also the process to purchase.
And that's what I was going to ask you. How does the process to purchase an REO differ from a typical purchase?
Well, Sean, a typical agreement of sale with a privately owned property is about 13 to 14 pages long. Okay? You use that agreement of sale 9 times out of 10 for foreclosure, but then the bank or the federal government, whoever owns that property, has something called addendums. And their corporate addendums could be another 30 to 40 pages long.
Okay. Now, why would they be adding these addendums onto it?
Well, what they do is you have lead paint addendums.
That's typical.
Which is a typical thing. You have what is as-is condition addendums.
Okay.
With them, they are not responsible for any repairs. You have to accept the property as you find it.
Okay. There's a lot of conventional listings that will say it's in as-in condition or so. And a lot of times when you're going to make an offer, they might say, hey, it's as-in. We're not going to make any repairs. But if they still allow a home inspection, you can still ask them to do it. There's no real, it doesn't mean you can't ask as long as you could walk away. How does an as-is addendum on an REO differ from someone just writing as in condition on the MLS or in a listing?
Well, there are
agreement?
2 types. First, 3 things to remember. First, there is no seller's disclosure. All right? They've never lived in the property.
Right.
So you do not know, they do not know condition. They encourage home inspections for the consumer to find out the condition, find out the problems. The REO company, whether it be the government or a bank, don't want to know the problems. That's a liability to them.
Okay.
They will not fix any problems. That is a liability to them. So you always have to be aware when you walk into a property, what you see is what you're going to get. Okay. They do not allow you to do any repairs till you own it. Right? Some people will come in and start putting in new kitchens and putting in new cabinets. You can't do that. You're helping them, not you.
So the reason why that's important is because depending on what kind of financing you want, the house might have to be in livable condition or up to
Correct.
code or something, because a bank typically isn't going to want to give you a mortgage on a house that's inhabitable, that you can't even live in. So sometimes, when you want a mortgage, if you're selling a house and I need a mortgage to buy your house, I'll say, hey, Jim, I need you to add some smoke detectors, some handrails and stuff, because otherwise I can't get the mortgage. And if you want to sell the house to me, you got to work with me. So we might do something like that. None of that in REO.
The answer will be no.
So when someone is looking at an REO, what are their financing options?
Well, there's 2 really good financing options. A conventional mortgage, if you have the resources. A conventional mortgage is not as particular about condition. It has to be at least livable. But they're not going to call out peeling paint or missing handrails.
As opposed to like an FHA or
Correct.
a VA or a government loan.
That is correct. But FHA has a wonderful product, which is a construction loan that is worked into your current loan that you're applying for. There are 2 types of that. One that's $25,000 and under, and 25 up to, I believe it's 75 now is the threshold.
Okay. Yeah, and I've done a couple of those. What are the? I always get the numbers in the letters.
I think it's the 203K.
203K. And they're great because basically you're borrowing against, you basically are promising to have a list of things done by an approved contractor, and then you're able to borrow against the future value once that stuff is done.
That's correct, Sean. That is correct. And they will send out their own appraiser, who will review the work to make sure it meets the standard that they expect.
Now, the one thing to remember is that the work needs to improve the value of the house.
That is right.
So, I've run into situations where our plan was to do a 203K, and we, had it all worked out, and then we did the septic inspection, and we found out it needed a whole new septic system. And one of the issues is that spending $10,000 on a septic system doesn't necessarily improve the value of the house. It not having a good septic will definitely decrease the value of the house. So there was a little bit of massaging to kind of,
that is something you could always come back and negotiate with.
Right. And it's usually better once this. So I know we're a little off topic here, but in our experience, it's better to go back to the seller and say, hey, your septic system failed. We need this off the price, as opposed to trying to put it into the 203K thing. But my point being that for the most part, at least for under $25,000, these should be things that are going to improve the value of the property.
Yes.
Now, is there a conventional equivalent to that if someone doesn't want to use FHA or go through FHA, or they don't want the higher interest rate for it?
There are construction loans that you can get, construct-to-perm loans conventionally, that you have to see which lender will do that. In this day and age, a lot of lenders have changed their standards. So you have to go through which lender. And I would start with the bank you deal with currently, because they have your history, and ask them, what type of product do you have for this property? It could be a renovation loan. It could be an equity loan. Or it could be just a plain second mortgage, depending on what price you get. But that's a discussion you would need to have with them.
So I think the bottom line is when you're dealing with an REO, your financing options are extremely limited.
They can be, unless you have cash.
And most likely, if you're going to get some sort of financing, the collateral is not going to be as much the property that you're buying, but possibly some other collateral that you already have on hand, or
possibly correct.
If you can get financing, it's going to be a second mortgage on another property or home equity or something like that, because the bank, although it is a property and it does have value, it has value when you're trying to buy it from them, but then when you're trying to borrow against it, they're like, well, let's see what
change.
Let's see what you do with it first.
Correct.
And then there's private financing. So I don't want to get too much into the intricacies of private lending and stuff, but for the most part, putting together a company that purchased these and being an investor, a commercial company is the most usually how private financing
hard
goes.
Money lenders are an avenue to go. Now you're going to be paying a much higher interest rate up front. They usually expect you to refinance it between 6 to 12 months of the original loan origination. So you have to make sure the repairs you do increase the value, not are just lateral moves. Also, you have to make sure that the value you're getting out of it on the long end will pay the debt you suddenly created. Hard money loans will finance not only the property, but they will also finance the repairs. But you've got to be prepared for the interest rate.
Okay. How else is the process different when it comes to buying one of these properties? So let's assume that you're not financing, or you're buying cash and that's all taken care of.
Let's say if we're buying with cash.
Yeah.
Typically, when you're buying cash, you can do a 15-day or a 30-day settlement.
Right.
With an REO, expect to do 45 to 60. okay, with a foreclosed property.
Okay.
Why would you say that? Well, there's always title issues.
Mm-hmm.
And even if you're buying cash, always, always, always order title work, a title search to be done on a bank-owned property.
Mm-hmm.
You never know what could have been missed through the foreclosure process. And if it goes through without you doing that, you're responsible for the old liens.
Mm-hmm.
Okay? But it usually takes 45 days for the examination to be done, considered complete. When you're dealing with the federal government, nothing happens overnight.
Right.
The one person that signed the contract will not be the person who approves it to go to settlement. There'll be 3 or 4 other steps on their end that the property has to go through before it gets to that point.
Real quick aside, this kind of, the more you negotiate, obviously, that whole the longer that process is. What's the relevance between the listed price and what they're actually going to accept it for? Because a lot of people think, oh, it's an REO, so I can go lower. There's other times where if they haven't gone through the process, at least with a short sale, sometimes the price is the agent guessing at what
Correct.
the bank would accept. So with an REO, would they take it at the price listed?
Usually when you're dealing with an REO, there has been at least 1, if not 2 appraisals already done. And they're actually comparing it to the market and comparing it to the observed damages by the appraiser. They don't do home inspections. They do observed. If an appraiser walks in and sees that their kitchen is missing, they will deduct that from the value. All right. That doesn't mean the bank will put a new one in. It just means they've already reduced that price.
Yeah, and my fear would be just the listing agent just kind of goes a little bit low, and even if you go in at asking, they still might say, well, we want a little bit more here or there.
We usually can't do that.
Okay.
All right. Usually when the listing price comes out, that covers the value of the property and any liens that need to be covered. All right. They've done their search. They're not going to move off that price very much.
Okay.
And at least in the first 30 days. After it sits on the market, it becomes a stale listing. All right. Usually within the foreclosure world, the REO world, is divided into quarters.
Okay.
All right. And they always want to make sure that by the end of the quarter, fresh inventory is coming on. That's when you're going to expect to see the best price reduction or the most negotiable time of pricing.
Okay. So we've talked about the financing and the process of getting the offer approved and getting to settlement. It's going to be a little bit longer. You have more people to approve it. Once you're in the house, let's say you are able to close on the house, what are you looking at?
Well, what you're looking at is if you've done a home inspection by a good home inspector, you should be at least prepared for plumbing leaks. Okay? Most bank-owned properties, foreclosed properties, have been winterized. Okay? Which is putting air through the lines, putting antifreeze in the elbows. Over time, that antifreeze eats into the joints, into the gaskets. And as that happens, if it's been for a long period of time, you get something called dry rot. Things start to dry out, and they don't hold or keep back the water anymore. So expect to find that.
Yeah, I know a lot of great agents who've gotten into the industry in the last few years, but when you've been doing this long enough to where you know what it's like to deal with a house that's literally been sitting vacant on the market for 2+ years, 3 years, 4 years.
Yeah.
It seems unrealistic being that we've been in such a hot market over the last couple of years, but if someone's been through that 08 to 012, 014 kind of cycle, it's very real possibility.
It's a real possibility to find plumbing issues. Another real possibility is when you came into the property the first time. to expect to see whatever's been left there from the former occupant still there. Some banks empty and clean their properties, some do not. Okay? You could be just buying everything. All right? I knew a gentleman who bought a car and bought a house and found a Corvette in the barn.
Oh, wow.
It was a 74 Stingray, but it needed some work. Next to that, though, you could find anything in there. I was involved in a property years ago that we foreclosed. The person was a professional hoarder. Okay? It took us 26-foot trucks to empty the house.
6 20-foot trucks.
26-foot trucks.
26-foot trucks. I can't even imagine
It took
a
3
house
days.
would fit that much stuff in there. But
Yes, it can. A 3-bedroom house can.
on a side note, I am hoping to have a future episode with someone who does the hazardous waste style clean outs.
Okay.
Because
They'll have some great stories for you.
once you, yeah, that's what I'm afraid of. But I mean, hoarding paper can decompose pretty quickly and be pretty nasty.
And you're going to find some infestation. You're going to find mice. You're going to find cockroaches. You're going to find termites. Termites love paper and cardboard. So be prepared to run into all those types of things. All kinds of fun smells, especially if a house has been closed up for a couple of years. It's very challenging sometimes to get past that. But always remember, you have a new plan for this house. And when you purchase the home, have that plan already in place. Have your contractors already in place. Or at least on the direction you're going to go in. Some people will purchase a foreclosure and not have any idea where to start, and they get overwhelmed. I, at one point in my career, foreclosed on a single home 4 times in 5 years. From the property owners walking away because they were getting overwhelmed with what they needed to do.
Now, overwhelmed financially or overwhelmed emotionally?
Financially and emotionally, because they come in hand. All right, you come in with great dreams, and those dreams are wonderful dreams. But you have to make sure your pocketbook can handle it. If you know you need a kitchen, prepare yourself to go 10 or 15% over what you expect to spend. Same as bathrooms, same as roofing, same as heating. Be prepared for that. Have your nest egg or your financial plan put together when you buy a foreclosure. If you're not ready for that or you don't have it, don't buy one. Buy a home that someone has already lived in, cared for, and loved.
Or find one post-flip.
Correct.
So the other option would be a professional went in there, made the purchase, got everything done, brought in the contractors, and now they're selling it at market value, maybe a little bit of a premium because it's got new stuff done.
Correct.
So for the average home buyer who's got other things going on in their life that's, outside of flipping houses, it might not be that bad of an idea, plan.
No, it's not.
To just buy it for more money, have traditional financing, which is actually pretty reasonable if you think about a 30-year loan, and have someone else deal with all that.
Now, with a foreclosure, Sean, one thing you must remember.
Yeah.
When you're buying a flip from a flipper, there's something called aging.
Okay.
Okay? You cannot go... A property has to be in possession of the current owner, current flipper, for 1 year before you can get FHA financing.
Okay.
All right?
Does that flipper have to... do they have to live in the house?
No, they don't have to live in the house. But they also have to show the improvements they made. Spray painting the walls white and putting down laminate flooring is not considered an improvement in the eyes of the FHA. That's why they say it's a 1-year ownership. Now, conventional mortgage, it's usually about 6 months with aging. They'll look at the market and they'll say, okay, the house is worth this much. You can get away with a little bit more conventionally. Now, there are credit union products. They're just as good as FHA. That would also qualify the house, as long as it shows the improvement in value through the appraisal or improvements in the house itself. So that's another way to look.
So how does this work? Because plenty of people buy a house and then flip it within a couple months, right? Mm-hmm. But the buyer's only limited to certain kind of financing.
Correct.
Okay.
Correct. They have to show, with FHA, you have to show that you've owned it for a certain period of time. Unless it was a full demo, down to the studding rebuild, which not many flippers will take into effect. Mm-hmm. FHA looks for that 1 year.
Okay. Interesting. Good to know. So that's really helpful. Jim, what's the best way that people can get a hold of you or find someone to help them if they're looking at or thinking about working with an REO?
The best way is to contact me here at the office at RE/MAX Ace Realty, or they can email me at James Whelan at remax.net.
Okay, great. Well, thanks a lot. I really appreciate it.
Great. Thank you very much.
Thanks for listening. This has been the Chester County Real Estate Podcast, brought to you by RE/MAX Ace Realty, serving buyers and sellers in the Chester County area. Subscribe for new episodes at acerealtypa.com/podcast. And you can find us on Facebook, YouTube, and wherever podcasts are found.
This episode is brought to you by RE/MAX Ace Realty in Downingtown, PA. Whether you're looking to buy or sell a home, we have a real estate expert for you. Search for homes or contact an agent at acerealtypa.com.